Superman. There are few characters out there who are as well known, regarded, or as cherished as the Man of Steel. Ever since his creation back in 1938, he's been in comic books, movies, and animated series, having always stood for truth, justice, and the American way. But like any other form of media, everyone has their own different interpretations on Superman, his supporting cast, his villains, and even what he means to the world. And with the recent ending of my adventures with Superman's first season, I really wanted to talk about Superman, what he means, and probably geek out a bit about why the recent animated series is perhaps the best interpretation of the character we've had in years. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, I am your ever-friendly Pokeprof, and welcome back to Fascinating Fiction. Doing things a bit differently this week since we're focusing on a single character and their overall history. This more comes from the fact that I was originally wanting to talk about the newest cartoon about the Man of Steel, but as I was writing this script, which is a lot later than I originally intended it to be, I came to the realization that I was wanting to talk about Superman as a whole, and not just the cartoon. It's also the fact that, as you faithful viewers might have realized at this point, I'm not the kind of YouTuber who likes to chase the most recent trends. If I'm going to be talking about something, I'm wanting to give it the respect it's due and not just make a video on something because it's popular. And to be honest, I just kind of wanted to rant about Superman for a little bit. So let's start proper, shall we? For those who haven't heard of it just yet, My Adventures with Superman is the newest animated series that recently came out on Cartoon Network's Adult Swim, with it being released on streaming with Max shortly thereafter. They do quite the different setup for Clark and friends, with the main focus on Superman mostly ignoring his powers as he grows up, trying his best to be a normal person within a normal life. This being the world of comic books, however, that doesn't last too long, with him eventually becoming Superman through a series of different events that are all building up to having different and somewhat new interpretations for several classic DC characters. What makes this show so good, though, is just how it portrays Clark himself. While the term himbo could definitely be thrown around with him, seeing as this version of the character has this big, dopey puppy energy about him, what makes this Superman so wonderful is just how pure he is. From hating to lie when it isn't about his alien origins, to his willingness to sacrifice himself for others, to even the fact that he is willing to take his time to help a little lost girl, it makes nearly all other versions of Superman look horrible by comparison. Mind you, I'm saying that mostly applying that to the live-action versions of Superman. Pretty much ever since the likes of Man of Steel, the prevalent idea for Superman was that of a god who acknowledges that fact, having little to no upbringing that would give him a reason to protect humanity, and overall lives in a world with no color or happiness because we've got to make everything dark and gritty. And the thing is, that isn't Superman. Superman, for me, has always been this moral paragon of comic books, a hero with values so pure that it makes people want to be better themselves. He was never a great hero because he could fly, bend steel with his bare hands, or rewire your brain with a kiss. He was a great hero because he had an unwavering moral compass that was gained from parents raising him to care for others, to do what he could do to help, and to never judge anyone on heresy alone. One of the most famous comics that I feel like really shows this side, that true element to me of Superman, is one where he ends up talking to a young woman named Felicity who's about ready to jump off a building. Furious and grieving after the passing of her mother and the state of the world, she demands to know what's the point of it all, to which Superman answers simply that life is just like that. Good and bad all mixed together. After promising her to let her choose her fate, to the point of even letting her fall to the streets below if that was her choice, Superman stays with her the entire day, letting her think and calm down. Superman then tells her, after she begins talking a bit more, that he knew someone who had a terminal illness and, knowing they were not going to be happy fighting said illness, eventually just ended it all. And while he never agreed with that choice and still doesn't, he understood why. That's when he says this to Felicity: If you honestly believe in your heart of hearts that you will never have another happy day, then step out into the air. I'll keep my promise. I won't stop you. But if you think there's a chance, no matter how small, that there might just be one more happy day out there, then take my hand. This is what Superman has always meant to me, and how I feel he should always be portrayed. Willing to spend an entire day with someone who is teetering on the edge, just on the hope that he might be able to save them. He doesn't force himself on them. He doesn't take away their choices. He doesn't even do much other than just be there for them. But for someone like Superman, who could break the very world with a flick of his wrist if he wanted to, that's what makes it all the more important. That for all of his power and ability, he's there for as long as it's needed to offer someone a better choice, and then allowing them the freedom to choose it. That's one of the major reasons I've always decried the recent attempts of Superman in live action as far as the movies. I mean, look at it like this. Could you ever see Zack Snyder's Superman ever doing anything like this? I'm willing to bet that even the biggest fans of that movie and its horrible sequel would probably answer, no, you couldn't. Honestly, some people I've talked to about this subject said that the last time they saw a Superman character in live action that they could actually see being this heroic paragon would stretch back all the way to the Smallville days. And that's honestly a rabbit hole of a series that I have not looked into since it started back in the early 2000s. Might be worth revisiting in the future. When it comes down to it, there's really only been one version of the character in recent years that I felt did any justice to the character, the Superman from the animated series back in the 90s. And even with how well they did a good job in portraying that character, there is an issue here or there that always kept it from being perfect for me. And though I say issues, I'm not saying that the character was bad. For the longest time, my gold standard for Superman was the 90s version. Part of it was simply for the fact that I grew up with the character, and part of it was the fact that he held true to what I expect for Superman for a long time. Kind, willing to help, always doing his best regardless of how bad the situation got. But if there's one thing that you can put to this particular Superman, especially later on the series, is the fact that he gets a little cynical. I think the episode that best points this out, and that everyone would probably know about, would be the one and only episode to involve Captain Marvel, who's another whole thing when it comes down to the comics. Regardless, the entire episode revolves around Superman being suspicious of Lex Luthor, because it's Lex Luthor, when he says he's reformed and is working towards making a new city, and eventually decides to use a Kryptonian-infused generator for the city's power supply. With Superman having had so many bad interactions in the past with Lex, as well as some uncomfortable feelings being around Captain Marvel, who's got such a similar power set, we see the Man of Steel end up making poor judgment calls and ends up fighting Marvel, while at the same time causing enough destruction for people to lose faith in him and the Justice League. Now yes, part of this is supposed to show off just how intelligent Lex and the other major villain of that series was. But I also feels like this shows just what I'm talking about, as Superman never sees the best out of Lex, only the worst. Mind you, this is all thanks to the fact that Lex has proven to be an unrepentant villain at this point, even at the end of this very episode. But it's the fact that Superman isn't capable of thinking that Lex might actually be honest in his redemption that kind of strikes me as an oddity about the character. In this particular episode, Captain Marvel feels more accurate to Superman's ideals than Superman himself. Again, this isn't a bad way to show off Superman, especially one who's fought and dealt with things as long as this particular version had. But that's what makes the difference, and why I've come to enjoy the Superman from the recent cartoons so much. Even for the people he's fighting against, even for the villains he knows are trying to hurt or do evil things, He's constantly trying to talk them down, or even saving them when they're in danger. His focus thus far has been the protection and care for the people who can't do it for themselves. It doesn't matter if they've done something evil or wrong before, he's willing to do his best to help them out. Some people might call this an aspect of innocence, which, yeah, let's admit it, the My Adventure Superman has it in spades. He's very much one of those characters who looks like you could tell him that you have some sort of special power, and he'd eagerly ask you to show it off. But that's only part of it. The other part that makes him my favorite version of the character thus far is the fact that this is the Superman who is the best of humanity. He's been taught by his parents to not hate people, to not judge them for what they've done. He's been told to help them out when they're in trouble, to try and understand them when they're in pain or angry. Heck, the final episode of the series that came out while I was writing the script even has his father say this.
What would you do if, let's say you had an enemy?
I'd turn him into a friend.
This Superman lives true to the name of Boy Scout, where he's willing to step in front of just about anything to take a hit so someone else doesn't have to. He does what he does because his human parents raised him to care for the world, to think of the world's needs, and to use his powers to make it a better place. This is one of my favorite new versions of the character, and I cannot wait to see more. I really hope we get it sooner rather than later, since otherwise the closest thing I'm going to be getting to this Superman is Deku, and that's at least another year before the next season of My Hero. With all that said, I hope you didn't mind the slightly weirder episode today, and that I've done a good job to entertain you. Hopefully you'll follow along with my content by subscribing and doing all the other things it gives us YouTubers life. If you wish to support me a bit more, I do have a Patreon where you can get access to bonus content. But until next time, stay frosty.